Elisa Logan, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for IOD, and I want to welcome you all to part 2 in our webinar series today, Using Analytics to Understand the Financial Impact of ICD10. Today we'll share with you our approach to measuring the financial impact of the ICD10 transition, reviewing the results of our own internal Coder Assessment 2020, a controlled test using our coders who coded live charts in both ICD9 and ICD10. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees are set to listen mode. This is to keep background noise to a minimum. You may use the raise the hand, ask a question, or chat button near the left side of your meeting manager pane to contact us at any time during the presentation. We will hold a Q&A at the end of the session, but you may submit your questions at any point during the presentation. We are recording this session and we'll have it available on our website within a few days. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow that includes instructions on how to download your CEU certificate. Now I'd like to introduce you to our co-presenters for today. Barbara Allen, who's the General Manager of the HIM Services Division. Barbara is responsible for the strategy of the HIM Services Division and the coding, clinical abstraction, auditing, ICD-10 education, and RAC product line. Our other presenter is Scott Nemchik. Scott is the Vice President of Coding and Compliance and Education. Scott is also responsible for educating our coding staff and ensuring compliance with the latest guidelines. And now I'll turn it over to Barbara, who will start us off today.
Thank you, Alyssa, and welcome everybody. We're really excited that all of you joined us for today's webinar. Before we dive into the content, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about IAD's coding division for those of you who might not be familiar. We employ more than 100 inpatient coders, most of whom are credentialed. We also employ a number of outpatient coders. Our coders are typically people with more than 10 years of experience and are proficient in a variety of environments, ranging from community hospitals to level 1 trauma centers. Our coding practice is constantly evolving, delivering products and services that facilitate the management of health information management today while innovating and meeting the needs of HIM organizations well into the future. The Coder Assessment 2020 is just one example of how we apply innovative technology to help healthcare organizations meet the real-world challenges. Today we're going to be sharing data derived from our own internal Coder Assessment 2020. This is the 2020 project that we put all of our own internal coders through. The Coder Assessment 2020 is a data-based assessment approach that uses the IAD Coding Gym, a technology solution that provides precise real-time information and deep analytics. The IAD Gym is the only platform that can gather and analyze data by coder, all the way down to the DRG and MDC level, and provide both training and financial analytics that benefit HIM and revenue cycle organizations. We are the first company to get out in front of ICD-10 with actionable data, which we'll be presenting today. The Coder Assessment 2020 identified ICD-10 skill gaps amongst our coders. We will show you how we use this data, giving you insight into coding metrics and baselines that map productivity and accuracy to the revenue cycle. We will show you the financial impact and share approaches that will help your organization avoid taking the financial hit. So let's get started. The Coder Assessment 2020 allowed for an apples-to-apples meaningful comparison of ICD-10 and ICD-9 performance using charts that we see on a very regular basis. We could see from the get-go the productivity and accuracy loss in ICD-10 and some serious implications. But understanding the drop in performance was only one part of the equation. In order to create actionable training and plans, we needed to know down to the specific codes where our problems were. So let's dive right in. We'll take you through our process, share our results, and along the way provide insight in how you could apply this to your own organizations. We are using our Assessment 2020, the Coding Gym applications, to collect and analyze the data that supports this webinar. So I thought we should spend just a few moments describing them. Here is how we collect and present both Gym and 2020 data. So let me turn it over to Scott so he can go through our Coding Gym application.
All right, thank you, Barb. So for those of you that weren't here for the last webinar, let's do a brief review of the two main functions of both Assessment 2020 and the ICD10 Coding Gym. In either application, the coder is presented with lessons in the form of real charts. These lessons are from a predefined list. The coders code the charts and enter their codes into the application, and then the magic happens. Their coding is immediately scored, and the results are presented. Instant feedback. Each assigned diagnosis and procedure code is qualified as correct, incorrect, or in some cases with diagnoses in the wrong position. Any codes that need to be added are shown to the coder. Every single code that was correct or that needs to be added is connected back to one or more places in a record that support the code. We call these annotations, and these allow the coders to connect the dots instantaneously. Lesson level results are rolled up into 6 meaningful key performance indicators that we could all relate to: DRG accuracy, principal diagnosis accuracy, MCC accuracy, and so on and so forth. The coders elapsed time for that record is presented back to them, as is the appropriateness of their DRG. Speed and accuracy data is collected right down to the codes and their individual accuracy, and sent on to our database where they can be subjected to our analytics. In analytics, the data fuels a library of reports designed to help you quickly assess the results while isolating root causes of error making. We'll be using actual reports from the analytics application throughout this presentation to show how we assessed our own productivity and accuracy and then framed up the solutions to the problems we ID'd. So let's begin with a look at the financial impact of ICD10, not from theory but from experience. But before we do that, let's see what you all think about the potential financial impact of ICD10. Okay, as an aside to my fellow organizers, I cannot see the poll results.
So it looks like that the majority, 51% of the respondents thought that they would see major large reductions in productivity DRG accuracy. And I think we, IOD, felt the same way after the initial results that we saw both in our ICD-10 training and in our 2020 assessment results. So I think the good news is that today we can hopefully help you look at a new approach to really drill down and minimize these impacts.
Right, agreed. So at least half of us are accepting our fate. So let's see what we could do about it. All right, moving right along. So we're gathered here today to talk about the potential financial impact of ICD-10, how it can be assessed, how it can be reduced. Our goal is not to scare the heck out of you, but to share with you the results we have actually seen in coding hundreds of charts in both ICD9 and ICD10. We have seen actual productivity losses in ICD-10, and we've been able to analyze the causes of those losses. We have seen actual decreases in DRG accuracy due to incorrect coding, and we have been able to analyze these as well. We have confidence in these two assertions because we have empirical evidence to support them. Evidence collected through a coding assessment approach that has never existed until now, Assessment 2020. We also know that both coding accuracy and productivity decreases can be systematically assessed and improved. This is accomplished through another tool, much needed and now available, the ICD10 Coding Gym. The gym allows for massive amounts of practice, immediate feedback, and focused analytics that you're not going to find elsewhere. We provided a very brief overview of the gym construct in the previous slide. By putting our own coders through Assessment 2020, we were able to assess the initial drop that we could expect when we started coding in ICD-10. and this was with the staff of high-performing ICD9 coders who were extensively book trained over the better part of 2013. The results here are sobering. If we were to generalize our findings onto a typical 200-bed hospital, assuming that their case volumes were similar to those in this assessment, we would see tremendous increases in the coding backlog as the coders adapted to ICD10. Without significant additional resources, uncoded revenue could approach $14 million in 6 months. That's the gray portion of the graph shown in the slide. Now, this $14 million is not a real loss. It's income delayed. The financial impact here is more related to the cost of short-term borrowing, maybe 5%, but still a fair amount of money. DRG accuracy declines from ICD10 coding can result in large net revenue declines. These could be from asking for less than you deserve, otherwise known as undercoding, or for asking for more than you deserve, in which case you may well lose it by way of one of the thousands of retrospective audit initiatives going on these days. If we again extrapolate our DRG accuracy findings into a 200-bed hospital with about the same case complement as Assessment 2020, in 6 months we would have lost or overcoded $8 million. That's depicted here as the orange portion of this graph. This is obviously a bigger problem than productivity is, as this is real money you're not receiving as to money that you are receiving, albeit in a very delayed fashion. It doesn't have to go this way, but it could. So let's call your attention to the 2 most important takeaways of this presentation. 1, that you see the need to find out for sure how ICD10 will affect your accuracy and productivity. And 2, that you understand the process of identifying the causes of reduced performance and fixing them before the hammer drops on 10/1/2015. So we ran a bunch of our coders through Assessment 2020, and as described earlier, it took longer to code charts in ICD10 than it did to code matching charts in ICD9. This reduction in productivity really comes as of no surprise, but the magnitude of the reduction did. It took, on the average, 22 minutes to code charts in ICD9. That's about 2.7 charts per hour. It took, on the average, 35 minutes to code charts in ICD10. That's about 1.8 charts per hour. Alternatively stated, looking at the ratio of productivity in ICD10 to ICD9, it initially takes 1 1/2 times as long to code in ICD10 as it does in ICD9. This, of course, is a significant drop. If this was our permanent reality, we would need 1 additional coder for every 2 that we already have. So we expected an immediate drop. I think everyone does. Not quite as much as it turned out to be, but an immediate drop nonetheless. Let's use a visual aid here to describe this. Here's our ICD9 productivity of 2.7 charts per hour. And here's our precipitous and dramatic decline to 1.8 charts per hour in ICD10. Even though we're optimists, we don't anticipate this returning to 2.7 charts per hour anytime soon. Based on the experiences we have seen in other countries who adopted ICD10, we're anticipating a return to about 80% of our ICD9 productivity. That's our go-live goal. This translates to an expected productivity of about 2.2 charts per hour. We're thinking that it will take about 6 months to get there, so we're expecting a curve that looks pretty much like the one you see here. So let's take a look at the potential financial impact of this coding productivity trend. Let's step back for a moment into our hypothetical 200-bed hospital with the same case composition as Assessment 2020 and see what the financial impact of the productivity curve would be. Let's begin by looking at the do-nothing option. Not that we expect anybody to do such a thing, but it does highlight the worst-case scenario, and the worst-case scenario is definitely bad. This is clearly the path to financial ruin. We start out great. No unbilled revenue, and then the work starts piling up. Initially, we're only getting to 30 of our 45 daily discharges. The other 15 are added to the pile. This is referred to as the Lucille Ball conveyor belt effect. Every 3 days, we add another day to DNFB. That's what a reduction in productivity from 2.7 to 1.8 charts per hour gets us. As the work piles up, so does the unbilled revenue. At the end of the first month, we are 11 days of discharges behind, worth about $3 million. At the end of 6 months, we're 52 days behind and close to $15 million in revenue waiting for coding. If we end up continuing with 20% productivity loss that we expect from ICD10 and can't find coders or agencies to do the work, at the end of the year, we will be behind in coding by almost 3 months. This translates to about $25 million worth of uncoded discharges. This, of course, is crazy, but if our hypothetical hospital isn't ready when ICD10 goes live, and if it can't find coders in time or agencies to help them, this is the future. Let's look at what we can do to prevent this. Over half of the impact of transition is in the first few months while we're getting up to speed while coding live cases. So what if we got through the transition well before ICD10 arrived? What if we are already coding at our target ICD10 productivity on 10/1/2015? That's what we're talking about next. We need to achieve the training impact shown here by the dark blue curve so that when ICD10 comes in October 2015, we are as proficient in ICD10 as we were in ICD9. Getting there requires that we know what parts of our productivity in ICD10 are broken and how we can fix them. So we'll introduce our next poll here. Before we move into productivity assessment, let's see what you think about the breadth of impact ICD10 will have on productivity.
So,
okay, Barnes, what do you think?
Yep. So the results are that the majority of people think that surgical will take longer, medical should be about the same, or that CCs and MCC, DRGs, medical and surgical will take the longest.
Okay, well that's kind of consistent with what we are doing these days. Surgical takes longer than medical, and charts with CCs and MCCs are on the average more complicated than those that don't have them. So a lot of that is true, and we should expect that in ICD10. What you're going to see is that there really is a small number of DRGs, at least in our case, and probably in yours, that take a majority of the additional time. It's really quite interesting. Okay. So what we know so far is that we coded a bunch of charts, one half in ICD9, the other half in ICD10. We also know that it takes longer to code them in ICD10. This data is interesting but not actionable. We contend that often obvious to all of us who expect that coding newborns will be much different and much faster than coding acute myocardial infarctions. Assessment 2020 and the coding gym provide us with a unique ability to conduct this analysis because it accurately tracks the actual time it takes to code each chart as well as the chart's DRG. We then see with great clarity the length of time it takes to code patients in any clinical group and to isolate high-performing groups and low-performing groups. Here's how we take that first step, uncovering productivity differences between MDCs, or major diagnostic categories. Major diagnostic categories are formed by dividing all possible principal diagnoses from ICD-10 into 25 mutually exclusive diagnosis areas. The diagnoses in each MDC correspond to a single organ system or etiology, and in general are associated with a particular medical specialty. The graph here, pulled directly out of our reporting system, shows chart completion time by major diagnostic category for our 2020 participants. The bar heights show how long it takes to code the average patient in MDC in both ICD9 and ICD10. Here, blue is the time in ICD9 and gold is the time in ICD10. The differences in the bar heights show the impact of ICD10 on that MDC. To improve productivity the most, we should tackle MDCs with the tallest gold bars with the biggest difference from ICD9 while taking volume into consideration. Said another way, find the things that you do the most that have the biggest differences. Here we can see that the largest contributors to the productivity decline are in MDC01, nervous system, MDC05, where it's taking us 70% longer, and MDC08, musculoskeletal, where it's taking 50% longer. And just to backtrack for a second, it's taking us twice as long to code charts in MDC01 in ICD10 than it is in ICD9. When we adjust for volume, assuming that the 2020 sample maps exactly into our MDC volumes, these three MDCs are responsible for about 80% of our decrease in productivity. Suddenly, the task at hand seems a little bit more manageable. Now that we have narrowed down our causes to three MDCs, let's look deeper into them to see if any specific DRGs are to blame. Looking at DRGs, we see DRGs 234 and 243 are taking much longer to code in ICD-10 than they were in ICD-9. In fact, we can reclaim 13% of our total productivity loss just by finding out why it's taking longer to code coronary bypasses with cardiac catheterization. It was taking us over twice as long to code coronary bypasses with cardiac caths in ICD-10 than it did in ICD-9. The next question is, what was taking longer? What was it about this DRG that was problematic? So here's where the coder in me comes out. Right? Charts grouping a DRG 234 involve diagnostic cardiac catheterization and CABGs, coronary artery bypass grafting. ICD-10 introduces significant coding changes to both of these procedures, a double whammy if ever there was one. Cardiac catheterization coding in ICD-10 requires coders to know contrast type. Is it high osmolar? Is it low osmolar? And imaging modality. Was it done using fluoroscopy or plain radiography? It's likely that the newness of these concepts is in large part responsible for the productivity losses seen here. Once these issues were identified, we were able to fix them. So here's part of the remediation. Decision-making speed related to contrast type can be improved by teaching coding personnel where contrast type is typically documented, ancillary reports, medication administration records. Parts of the record that we clicked past or thumbed through have a newfound and profound importance. Decision-making speed to contrast type can also be improved by developing a contrast key that relates contrast name back to contrast osmolarity for easy reference. Decision-making speed related to imaging modality can be improved by teaching coding personnel where imaging modality is typically documented. Teaching coding personnel terms that are synonymous with fluoroscopy. Developing a policy and procedure to address default selections when radiology modality is not documented. Similarly, decision-making speed related to CABG coding can be improved by retraining coding personnel on the concept of graft origin and destination and how each of these concepts relates back to specific characters in a PCS code. Developing a policy and procedure to address default selections when the name of the harvested vein graft was not documented. Retraining coding personnel on the proper device value characters for commonly used bypass grafting techniques. We're able to isolate all of these points of pain using the analytics coming out of the gym. This is an assessment of one of our high-impact DRGs and how we remediate its negative effects. We then go on to repeat the same process with the next most significant problem area and so on. Our coders would continue practicing and being assessed in the gym. We'd make sure that these problems did not resurface. These, again, are our main productivity issues. They may or may not be your main issues. There's great variation between sites, and each is bound to have its own central issues. To know what's going to rock your facility's boat, you're going to need to conduct a 2020 assessment. So returning back to our hypothetical 200-bed hospital, let's say that the plan to mitigate the productivity impact of ICD-10 goes something like this. We start off by conducting the 2020 assessment and find that our productivity will drop to 1.8 charts per hour under ICD-10. That is now a known. We then identify the cases responsible for the majority of the decline and bring them back to standard. We continually practice coding in the ICD-10 coding gym and track our accuracy and productivity, making sure that we're seeing improvement, making sure there's not regression. So our ongoing ICD-10 productivity has leveled off at 2.2 charts per hour, 20% less than we have in ICD-9, and we know it. We look for a new coder to make up the 20% drop in residual productivity and have them in place for April 1st of next year. Let's hope we get no surprise announcements next April 1st. We give the new coder 6 months of practice time in the coding gym and assess his or her performance up to the live date. When ICD-10 coding goes into effect on October 1st, 2015, we are ready. That's our projection here in the green line. We have exactly enough capacity and see no further drop in productivity. Pre- and post-ICD-10 worlds pretty much look the same. We avoid any portion of the coding and revenue backlog that would have occurred had we done nothing or had we waited too long to prepare. This is the future that any of us would want. So some of these concepts may be new to you, and yes, we're going pretty fast here. Remember, if you have any questions you would like answered, just enter them into the window in the webinar panel. Now, before we go into accuracy assessment, let's ask about your current DRG accuracy.
Okay, so Scott, it looks like the majority of the people, 57%, say that they are between 95 and 97% DRG accuracy with ICD9.
Okay, that's great. That's awesome. Congratulations on that. That's no small feat. One of the things about getting a handle on your DRG accuracy is that it's not a very easy thing to do. A lot of times we say that we're so accurate based on, an audit that was performed at some point in time. But it becomes difficult to repeat over the course of time. We're going to show you how the gym allows for a very easy way to measure your DRG accuracy, especially heading into ICD-10 where that's critically important. Okay, back to this wacky looking graph. We've talked about how we can assess and reduce the productivity impact of ICD-10 by using Assessment 2020 to diagnose the impact, and then by focusing our practice in the ICD-10 coding gym to create mastery where there was pain. So now let's turn our attention toward the potential effects of accuracy, or to be more exact, the potential effects of inaccuracy. That's the orange portion in this graph. We'll apply exactly the same process we use for productivity, but this time to assess and solve problems related to inaccurate coding in ICD-10 that affect payment. So as we know, case mix is a function of accurate and complete coding, and it has a profound effect on financial performance. It's much more important to get the DRGs right than it is to get them quickly. Payment delayed is still payment. Payment that is lost is very unlikely to return. Further, assessing accuracy is a lot more difficult than assessing productivity. Determining productivity requires as little as the ability to count and a clock. Determining coding accuracy, and this is what I was alluding to, requires that the coding itself be audited, a process that takes more time than the coding a chart in the first place. The type of broad-based coding accuracy assessment required to assess performance under ICD-10 can be prohibitively expensive. 2020 and the ICD-10 coding gym neatly solves this dilemma by providing a fixed library of pre-audited charts made available to all coders. Once initial data is collected, here's how it's analyzed and turned into improvement activities. So over the course of many years, our coders have coded well over 500,000 charts in ICD9, with much attention being provided to ongoing quality assessment and feedback. We expect at least 95% accuracy, and we get it. When we coded ICD10 charts in Assessment 2020, we saw a significant drop in DRG accuracy in ICD10, down to about 80%. If we were a 200-bed hospital with about the same composition as we find in the 2020 assessment, this error would equate to about $8 million in the first 6 months. This is real money, not the DNFB kind. This looks awful, but thanks to the analytics in 2020 in the gym and the preventative planning that it allows for, this doesn't have to be you. Let's start on the clinical assessment of accuracy, just like we did for productivity. Exactly like we did for productivity, we can narrow the search for patterns of errors by going down the clinical tree provided by the prospective payment system. So let's take a look at this graph. Again, pulled directly out of the gym reporter. Average accuracy is represented by the height of the bars. Shorter bars mean lower accuracy. Blue bars represent coding in ICD9, and gold bars represent coding in ICD10. It is interesting and very pleasant to notice that in half of the MDCs, we're actually doing better in ICD10 than ICD9. But where we're doing worse, we're doing much, much worse. In our case, this means that we need to focus on MDCs 06 and 10 with accuracies of 44% and 55% respectively. There were two different DRGs coded in this MDC in ICD9 and ICD10, 331 and 346. ICD9 coding in DRG 331 was close to 80%, much better than it was coded in ICD10, where only 1/3 of those got the DRG right. We can see here that DRG 346 was problematic in both ICD9 and ICD10, but about 50% accuracy in both coding systems. So let's take a deep dive here into DRG 346 using a view that wasn't available in the productivity assessment, the ability to evaluate the pattern of errors. The correct DRG here was 346, minor small and large bowel procedures without complication. With this tool, we can see the choices that the coders made on those charts that should have ended up in DRG 346. In ICD-10, 5 coders thought that the correct DRG was 331, major as opposed to minor bowel procedures. This selection results in a total payment impact of about $11,000. 3 coders thought that the correct DRG was 349 rather than 346, for a total revenue error of about $6,000. 1 produced an ungroupable case at a cost of about $7,000. In ICD9, virtually every coder who missed this DRG saw a CC where none was present. Something we probably should look into. After all, we still have 14 more months of ICD9 here. We hope. This lesson involves the takedown and reversal of an ileostomy, a procedure that in ICD-10 requires us to know how to use root operation repair. We also have to know that it needs to be used twice in this instance, once for the intestinal segment, once for the abdominal wall. Certainly different than we've been doing this for the past 25 years. Repairing the coding in this DRG required an improvement in only 2 concepts. 50% of our errors were due to using root operation bypass instead of root operation repair. 38% of our errors were due to omitting the repair of the ileum. Yes, in addition to repairing your abdominal wall, they also need to restore your plumbing. The fix for these errors is actually quite simple. Provide some supplementary instructions to the coders on the ICD-10 PCF guidelines related to the use of root operation repair. It's one of the more odd root operations. Provide a reference and have a discussion with the coders on ICD-10 PCF guideline B3.2a, which will help us better understand why 2 codes are needed here. Practice in the gym and make sure those issues don't reappear. This is but one complete path of inquiry leading to the remediation of a significant source of coding and DRG error. On to my favorite graph. While you can adopt our methodology, tools, and approach, you can't simply adopt our remediation because you need to first perform your own diagnosis and find out where it is that you hurt. The graph here shows the kind of diversity that we're talking about. we took the bottom 20 DRGs for 6 different facilities and compared them. The height of each line represents the number of facilities that share the same DRG in their bottom 20. There is no single DRG in the bottom 20 of all 6 facilities. The highest, DRG 064 and DRG 621, are shared by only 2/3 of the facilities. And we took the x-axis labels out here because, frankly, they presented poorly. Over half of the DRGs are a problem for only a single facility. We've just taken care of DRG 346, one of our 14 problem DRGs. We found it, analyzed it, prepared a remediation plan to fix it, and executed that plan. We would then go on to another of our problem DRGs and repeat the same process. So putting ourselves back into our hypothetical 200-bed hospital, I think we've broken some readmission rules here. But with the same case distribution as 2020, our objective was to reduce the financial impact of ICD10 on our cash flow and revenue, avoiding the $14 million in uncoded revenue and the $8 million in incorrectly billed revenue. To do that, we assessed the impact of ICD10 on our accuracy and productivity using Assessment 2020. We analyzed the DRGs and specific codes responsible for the negative impact using our analytics. We developed remediation strategies aimed at eliminating the major causes of negative impact. We tested the success of those strategies and gained further proficiency by coding charts in the ICD10 coding gym. We identified the need for one additional coder and had them hired and in place by April 1st of 2015. Our imaginary hospital wanted an ICD10 future that looks like our current ICD9 performance. And by implementing this plan, it looks like we're going to get it. That brings on the next poll. So let's talk a little bit about benchmarking.
Okay, so Scott, it looks like the majority of the people say that benchmarking would be very helpful if it's directly applicable to them. And that the next highest level was 21% said that they often use external benchmarking data to access performance. So I think our feeling is benchmarking is extremely important. It's been very helpful to us as we've evaluated where we are with ICD10 and certainly helped us justify the costs of continuing investment in training, and it looks like everyone else agrees with that. So
yeah, well, that's great. So yeah, benchmarking, usually difficult, not very easy to do historically. People kind of play their performance metrics close to the vest, so there's not a lot of transparency in that area, but we're doing some very cool things with benchmarking here in the 2020 assessments. Let's get on and talk about that. Benchmarks. Back up for a second. So why should we be concerned with benchmarking? Why would we care about how our coding compares to others? We're about to enter a new world of coding, one where the maths of the previous world no longer apply. You can throw them out. Let's say that our ICD10 coding productivity, as measured in the coding gym, is 1.8 charts per hour. Is that good? Should we rest on our laurels, or should we dig in and get to work? Should we plan on being at this level when we start looking for new coders, or should we wait and see? Let's say our DRG accuracy is 92%. Again, how do we know whether we're done? The way we will know is by measuring ourselves against others to see how we stack up. That's benchmarking. And getting applicable benchmarks for coding has always been enormously challenging. Different facilities have different chart structures, different abstraction requirements. They vary in terms of case complexity. They use different coding tools and a host of other differences that make meaningful comparison impossible. With the ICD10 coding gym in Assessment 20, meaningful benchmarking is now possible because any coder at any facility will code the same charts. Chart-related differences disappear. The process is stripped of all abstracting and other non-coding tasks, so everyone is doing coding and only coding. All work is measured against a fixed standard of accuracy, so differences in accuracy due to auditor differences disappear. Here's how it looks. All users of both Assessment 2020 and the GYM anonymously participate in the creation and maintenance of benchmarks. Here we can see how productivity varies between coders using the GYM. The least productive coders are coding 1 1/2 charts per hour. That's the bar at the far left. We have one coder, probably me, coding at the superhuman rate of 6 charts per hour. On the average, we're seeing about 2.4 charts per hour. If your coding in the GYM is at 2.4 charts per hour, based on current data, you're about average. If you're below that, with practice, you should see improvement. These benchmarks will be continually refined as more coders code charts in the GYM. The elusive accuracy benchmarks are equally available. Here, we're seeing the development of an ICD10 coding population using the GYM. On the average, they're up to 86% accuracy in ICD10. By mid-2015, we expect an average in the mid-90% range in a much narrower distribution. By using the GYM, you not only participate in benchmarking, but you have the ability to see how well your coders are performing when compared to coders from across the country. So we have one final question before we summarize.
So it seems that the majority of the people would like to see how their ICD10 productivity and accuracy compares to others. A number of the rest of them would, the rest is really equally distributed between the other three. The specific causes of productivity decline due to ICD10, the DRGA accuracy decline, specific causes, or how many of new coders they would need in ICD10. So I think it looks like all the information really that we provided today people are interested in, but specifically how the benchmarking, which is great.
Yeah, so these are a bunch of tough choices. Like, how do you pick between these four? I think all the answers are correct, and we have the solution to provide those answers.
So I'm going to go ahead and, in closing, reiterate that the data, insights, and plans that we presented today are unique to IOD. And as Scott explained, there's lots of variances. So your data and your plans will be unique to your organization, and the outcome of a 2020 assessment would be unique to your organization. But the good news is that we are here to help. IOD can help you assess your coders at a very granular level so that you can identify the specific skill gaps. The IOD Coding GYM is the only platform that can gather and analyze data by coder down to the DRG and MVC level and provide both training and financial analytics that help benefit HIM and revenue cycle organizations. Knowing where your coders need help and what financial impact their deficiencies will have on revenue will give you a clear picture of training and practices priorities. It certainly has done that for us. Because the GYM gathers data in real time, you are able to monitor progress very closely. You will be able to make data-based decisions if you need to make a course correction or other adjustments along the way. And you will be able to track the results and adjust if necessary. The other piece of good news is that you have time to do this, and you can do it right. We can work with you to create a plan that uses the next 13 months efficiently, ensuring that you are not overspending on training. We will help you apply our approach to your own situation so you can successfully and efficiently prepare for ICD-10. Right now we're going to go to questions and answers. So those of you who have any questions, you can go ahead and type them, and we will begin to vet those and answer those.
Hi, this is Carl Cottrell. I'm the official question reader.
All right.
So the first question is, how hard is it to install?
The application is very easy to install. It takes very minimum IT resources, so it's very easy.
Okay, thank you. What about analysis of APR DRGs, New York State?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. We don't currently have the ability to do analysis across APR DRGs. That DRG scheme is not what we built the product around. It's a little bit too complicated to integrate.
But it does do MS DRGs. So if you're going to use APR DRGs, that's pretty much fine because we'll turn it into MS DRGs anyway.
Exactly. We could group on our end into an MS DRG.
Right, just because the DRGs, the whole PPS structure is so important to the analysis of the data. It's a must-have. Have you done analysis using CAC?
We have not. So we internally do not use CAC at this time, and certainly have a number of client sites where our coders have used it. But at this time, we really just wanted to look at an apples-to-apples comparison on manual coding.
Yeah, again, good question. It just introduces a variable that we don't use on a daily basis. So apples to apples is what we're after here.
Okay, here's a coder to use question, Scott. To contrast an imaging modality, when this is documented in the medical record, does it have to be signed by an MD in order to code it? Aha! The trap is laid.
This is like an off-the-record response because I don't want to be...
Oh, no, man, you're public.
Yeah. I do not think that imaging modality needs to be signed off by a physician. I think as long as the evidence of the modality is present in the record, for example, documentation of cine angiography somewhere by someone, I think it's going to be fine. So your question kind of illustrates the fact that ICD10 PCS is way out in front of the guidelines. So I think CMS is going to have the work cut out for them catching up to questions like these over the next 14 months.
All right. So that's it for the questions that were submitted by the audience.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. We certainly appreciate it. Elisa, do you have any closing housekeeping rules?
Sure. Again, as Barb said, thank you again for joining us today. I would encourage you to reach out to your IOD sales representative to set up a time to see how IOD can maybe help you prepare for ICD10. And watch for an email from us that will contain your CEU certificate. And have a good day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.